Wonderful. So this is Girl's Best Friend, Tracing the Animal Companion and Haunting Ground in Fran Bow. In the back, we have Fran rescuing her beloved cat, Mr. Midnight, who we will be talking about shortly. Um, because video games are an entirely, they're a very different medium from books or films, it may help to go over a few points of difference so that we can understand how to approach video games as a narrative, as a narrative creature. So Dominique Arsenal provides a lot of very handy framework for thinking about that. So whenever we talk about games, whenever we talk about narrative in video games, we unfortunately will always go back to the early debate in game studies, which is ludology versus narratology. So ludology is simply the argument that we need specific tools for understanding video games, and narratology proposes that we can use theories that already exist to look at it. So beyond that, he offers a narrative program, narrative structures, and narrative infusion. The last two are not of super interest to us because narrative structures are simply the ways branching choices can affect the way a video game narrative plays out. And narrative fusion is also ways that narrative can be introduced in a minor aspect. So minor optional aspect. So for example, the audio logs of BioShock. So you pick them up and you have a little character monologue, entirely optional, incredibly missable. Uh, so let's circle back to narrative program. So for narrative program, we can have high level, so these would be cutscenes, or we can have low level, and these would be player actions, and they both exist at the same, they not necessarily at the same time, but they both exist. So within that, there are four dimensions. So extensiveness would be the extent of world building, character development, so on. Intermediateness would be if I'm watching someone else play it, do I lose something when it comes to experiencing the video game? Compulsoriness, can we skip cutscenes? Can we skip certain narrative elements? And compellingness, which is, would you keep playing this if the narrative wasn't good? So that leads us to this beautiful chart. Uh, and it is essentially a way we can understand how narrative, the role of narrative. So all the way at the corner, we have a narrative, which would be Tetris. So there's not much in, there's nothing in there actually. There's no framing narrative. You are just tossing down those blocks. Then next to it, we have hyponarrative. So sometimes we'll have a frame story for this. But usually the gameplay is much more of a stronger feature. So the majority of the games out there, and indeed the two games we're going to look at, are in fact meso-narratives. And meso-narratives have, kind of as the name suggests, it's a bit of a middle ground. Over here we have hyper-narrative, where the narrative is absolutely driving everything. So something like the story mode of Mass Effect or Disco Elysium, you better like reading. That's the short version. You better like reading. Um, so for the role of the player, my sort of guiding star is, oh my goodness, is sort of what Galloway writes about. Um, and he writes about this sort of the well, I'll just read it. So games are an interactive medium that require constant physical output by the player, action, doing, controlling, pressing buttons, controlling, and so on. The player is significantly more than a mere audience member, but significantly less than a diegetic character. It is the act of doing, of manipulating the controller, that imbricates the player with the game, end quote. And I think this is really quite important for remembering how we interact with animal characters later on. Procedural rhetoric. So this is one of those. Okay, so anyway, we're still going to talk about procedural rhetoric. So procedural rhetoric is the idea that video games are a rule-based environment, and this is set forth by Ian Bogost. And he argues that because video games are rule-based narrative, which rule-based environment, which anything that you can do has already been predetermined by the game itself. So because of that, you can begin to formulate an argument about what the game is making based on what it does or does not let you do. So, Animal Crossing. So Bogos uses this, and it's in his YouTube talk, and he argues that so because when you start Animal Crossing, it's a game about a cute little world full of these wonderful, sweet little beings, but you have no house. And there's another being called Tom Nook, sells you a house, and you have to pay him back. There is no opting out of the mortgage you now have. So he argues that Animal Crossing can be understood to provide procedural rhetoric about what the game is telling you about long-term debt or having a mortgage. So, which brings us to sort of our last little piece on video game analysis, which is problems. So, really, the biggest one out there that Bistu and Tannenbaum suggest is indeterminacy. So, essentially, every player is going to play the game slightly differently, even if you have a very, very fixed narrative. Maybe you look at that object first. Maybe you look at that object. Maybe you'll go into a room and you decide, nope, turn it around, not dealing with that right now. Those are all different ways of experiencing the game world, and they're all going to be different from person to person. So unfortunately, what that leads to us is that we don't have a fixed text to look at. So whereas if I wanted to look at Wuthering Heights, for example, there's a book. We can all agree there's a book called Wuthering Heights, and we can look any page number depending on the edition. You're going to have it. It's fixed. Unfortunately, that does not exist for video games. Secondly, is the scope. Some of these worlds can be quite massive. I know I have 94 hours on Pathologic Classic just from going through the route of each of the 3 characters. My God. And lastly is the difficulty of the game itself. They can be kind of hard, and if you're not able to progress to the next area or the next level, you're simply not going to experience the game. And that can be a little bit of a problem. So animals. So Janchi offers us a little framework for understanding animals in video games. So he divides them into 5 main categories, and these are enemy, background, hero, companion, and tool. All of these are like mostly self-explanatory. Tool is a little harder to get a hold of. These are resources. These are animals that are understood as resources in strategy video games. From there, we can break it down into more categories. So we can do actual representation. So these are animals as they appear, like cats or dogs. You'd see them in real life. Legendaries would be creatures from mythology or folklore. Extrapolations would be like really sci-fi stuff, like think Alien from like the Alien games, the Alien game adaptations. And then lastly, we have hybrids. So hybrids would be animal-human hybrids. If you're familiar with Skyrim, these would be the Khajiits, so they're half animal, half human, but it's a whole thing. So a roadmap. So our roadmap for today is I will give you a game overview as we go. Then we will circle back to look at cultural connections of our animal companion. And then we'll end with a post-humanist close reading. All right, let's go. So we do have to define post-humanism, don't we? So I will be going with the strand of critical post-humanism as proposed by Nair. And this goes as, quote, critical post-humanism is an ethical project that asks us to ponder and act upon the acknowledgement that life forms have messy intertwined histories, from borrowed, adapted, merged, and mutually dependent origins to cooperative evolution of a species. Life forms have always lived and become with others. So let's do it. All right, Mr. Midnight. So Fran is a click and point game from Swedish film development studio, cheapers, video game development studio, Kill Monday. So it's set in the 1940s, and it follows recently orphaned Fran as she escapes from an asylum in search of her cat, Mr. Midnight, and the terrible truth behind her family's murder that she also did witness. So we see Mr. Midnight over here with Fran as they reunite. So Fran is part of the whimsical macabre tradition of the contemporary happy Gothic tradition, as coined by Catherine Spooner. So mostly we're going to look at the juxtaposition of childlike and really quite morbid imagery. And this can take the form of imagery from like children's culture or entertainment. So these would be toys or fairy tales. And sort of the idea that it ends up inhabiting this sort of dual role as, quote, both sinister and nostalgic, end quote. So most importantly, it offers a space. So whereas the traditional narrative for the goth girl is to find community and give up her goth clothes and appearance, goth girls in the whimsical macabre are allowed a prolonged space of childhood, so they never have to assimilate into mainstream culture. So this would be, for example, this would be Violet Baudelaire from A Series of Unfortunate Events, um, who never grows up, even though there's like 13 books. Uh, so, so Fran Beau's adoption of the stylist convention with its narrative implications is further compounded by the fact that it has a deeply ambiguous narrative. Uh, Mr. Midnight dies in the end and then comes back. You have locations that bleed into each other. You have multiple characters die and then come back in strange and unusual forms. It's very hard to get a hold of, and I think it's a little tricky. So there may not necessarily be a shared reality in a shared sense. So, as Sarah Stong notes, the game's narrative, quote, never dictates which parts occur in reality, which parts occur in a parallel world, and which parts occur in Fran's mind, end quote. More precisely, Fran Bow as a text is concerned with Fran's personal experience with and perspective of her madness and trauma, or what Stefan Heinrich Simon calls subjectification. He notes that Fran's time in the asylum is marked by objectification, which he uses within his typology of madness to mean that, quote, the mad character is being looked at from an external perspective. And Fran counters this sort of objectification with her own commentary as a means of fighting back against these perspectives. So what arises from this pairing of the whimsical macabre and an intense focus on Fran's interiority is a text in which different ways of being with non-human entities can be explored from the narrative space of childhood, most prominently through Mr. Midnight. So let us, oh, I did it last time too. Okay, the slides are continuing. Oh my goodness. So Fran Bow is couched within Scandinavian mythology, despite its very fantastical elements. Um, this is probably most best seen when Fran wishes in the forest that she hopes she sees a troll out there. Um, and then, of course, later on in one of the transitions between levels, she will in fact be chased by a giant one, which is very scary. Um, but what about the cats that came before Mr. Midnight? So cats arrived in Northern Europe with the spread of the Roman Empire, as archaeologist Matthias Toplak notes. And they arrived about 2000 CE, or 200 CE. They They were buried in graves, and unfortunately, we don't have a very exact understanding of why, to the best of my knowledge. They may have fulfilled a variety of cultural meanings. So this may have been the burial of a beloved pet. They may have fulfilled the role of a psychopomp. There may have been some kind of cultic activity. At the end of the day, we unfortunately just do not know. We also have the European wildcat, although it had been largely extinct by the time we do get the domestic cat in Northern Europe. As Toplick notes, it also may have been an object of veneration. At the end of the day, we don't know, unfortunately. So when we look at animals of Old Norse mythology, we start to have a few problems. So if we look at the text itself, as Toplick notes, it's very possible that these depictions later on are colored by the late Middle Age depiction or understanding of cats as really a negative creature. So as Kvindold and Simpson-Dorff note, Christianity came really quite relatively late to Scandinavia. As you can see, like the timeline, there's overlap from the Christianization and when the works were being written down. So that brings us to Old Norse cats. So domestic cats are relatively rare. Cats are used as an insult, sometimes for cowardice. Although we perhaps nowadays think of Freya's two cats and the world encircling serpent that hides itself as a cat. As Toplick notes, quote, the most famous reference to what he describes as the most famous reference to cats in Old Norse saga literature, end quote, is not even a cat. It's a sorceress. Um, we have in the saga of Eric the Red, we have a sorceress who wears a capskin hat and gloves, and this is absolutely fascinating. But what about the actual cats? Okay, so when we see the cats, these are cats who are up to no good. They are, as Bjorn's notes, um, they're not cats you want to know. So, for example, we have 20 enchanted cats who do battle for their nefarious sorcerer thief master. Um, and we also have a monstrous cat mother who can only be defeated through divine intervention, divine Christian intervention, I should note. Um, and we also have a post-medieval folk tale of a cat assassin attacking the Reverend. So that all of these attack at a threshold or at a door, Bjorn's understands as a quote reflection of the cat's semi-domestic, semi-wild nature. And we can see a little picture over there. Cats in the Middle Ages. So this is where things really start getting going, right? So Metzler notes that there are two variations of the quote of the cat as quote diabolical animal. So these are quote as allegory for the devil catching souls and as direct manifestation of the devil as an animal worshipped by heretics and later on by witches in subverted Sabbath ceremonies. End quote. So they're quite fascinating, quite fascinating descriptions of these cats who would be worshipped. And so Gervas of Tilbury is believed to originate folklore that the witches will receive identical injuries in their human form that they received in their cat form, and we later see this in Swedish folklore as well. There's a really quick one recorded by Lindau, where there's a serving girl who sleeps on the oven, and one day there's a cat that shows up instead, and the two shoemakers who are by it kill it. And then the serving girl reappears stone cold dead. So as it turns out, she had transformed into a cat because she was going to haunt people as a nightmare. The supernatural creature that gives people nightmares, and then the cats are one of the other forms it can take. Troll cats, I love these little guys so much. All right, so these are, as Gvindolden Soldor notes, witch familiars. And what are you gonna do as a witch in the Scandinavian in the Scandinavian village? You're gonna have your cat steal milk for you. So these could show up as a ball of yarn, or they could also show up as a cat. You also do have a milk hare in, I think, Norway or so, but that's outside. So these can sometimes leave trails of what's called troll cat vomit. And these may have been a mushroom, and I pictured the mushroom over here, which, yeah, it kind of does look like, it kind of does look like vomit. Or it could also have been the foam of the spittle bug, tragically unpictured. So back again to Mr. Midnight. Mr. Midnight inherits many of these medieval and post-medieval. Okay, yeah. Suspicions of cats. We are clicking very quickly, I'm afraid. So he calls out to Fran, forming the inciting incident of the narrative, persuading her to go and travel to reunite with him. And the first form he encounters elicits a mixture of fear and unease as a cat robot. So trapped in the asylum, he can only repeat that if Fran cannot catch him, that means he has not been found yet. He will later provide supernatural intervention from the wicked spirit that's been plaguing Fran as she crosses the threshold between the quote civilized asylum and the forest. And in the forest, in which he's narratively linked, Fran will enter into relationships with other beings. Some are scary, some are quite ordinary. And within this unchristian literary space, it serves as, quote, a twisted or inverted version of idyllic, sacred, and ordered nature, end quote. In short, an inverse of the Garden of Eden, as Elizabeth Porter has noted. So Mr. Midnight is marked by, quite notably, by a capacity for speech. As Daniel notes, talking animals challenge the human animal and subject object binaries, and we accord them subjectivity based on their ability to speak. And it is this ability to speak that Mr. Midnight uses to encourage Fran um, when she's faced with genuinely terrible and upsetting visions about what has happened. Here in the screenshot, we can see that Mr. Midnight is consoling Tree Fran after she's just seen a vision of herself committing suicide by jumping off. And this capacity for speech and his comfort is ultimately quite important for Fran's ability to escape the pathologization of the asylum. Near the end, we meet Little Fran. She's just known as Little Fran within the text, and she does not have Mr. Midnight, and she's sort of hopelessly trapped within a terrible system of medical violence. Most notably, Fran rejects the idea of pet ownership. Instead, she argues that he is her friend, not her pet. She does not own him. Um, oh, we're getting. Oh my gosh. I am clicking ahead and I do not mean to click ahead. So part of Fran, so we are now at our clip section of the area. Um, in two in two segments of the narrative, we can take control of Mr. Midnight and we will play the game through him. And this is one of two. The other one's not super interesting, I'm afraid. Within this, Fran has crashed into one of the many different realities that she can travel to. And in that she has accidentally turned herself into a tree, and she has no means of communication with the other beings who are very wondering what she's doing there. So she tasks Mr. Midnight with finding her purse, which is usually your inventory for most of the game, and then using the photo to prove to the other beings that she's like them. She's a thinking, feeling creature just like them. So with that, let us watch a small clip. Right, so that is our Fran Bao clip. So Mr. Midnight is a creature who is understood within the space of childhood. Fran never grows up, and in fact, she does end up rejecting the adult world for the wonderful little world we just saw, Itherstia. So Fran's status as a goth girl who never ages out of childhood and indeed refuses childhood at the end of the refuses adulthood at the end of the narrative allows her to never have to grapple with the changing relationships of animals, with animals that becoming an adult can entail, as Matthew Cole and Kate Stewart have noted. And this shifting relationship, as Zoe Jacques notes, um, can be quite difficult if you understand that being a human does put you in a position of power over the animal. So what about the animal companion that does not speak? So that brings us to Haunting Ground. So Haunting Ground is a 2005 game by Capcom, which is probably better known for its Resident Evil series. It follows Fiona and the dog she has rescued as she attempts to traverse a terrible castle belonging to her family and the terrible families she has in there. So they seek to either rape or kill her to perpetuate their own immortality. It is part of the survival horror genre, which Taylor reminds us is the aesthetics of horror coupled with the gameplay on surviving a hostile game world. And that is perhaps the broadest definition possible for a very contentious field that has a lot of internal contradictions going on in there. So survival horror does have ties to the ludic Gothic. It does have ludic ties to the Gothic, as both are interested in transgressing boundaries, as Taylor notes. Kirkland does note that Haunting Ground is very, very heavily entangled with the Gothic aesthetics, trappings, and stock characters. So if we remember our wonderful friend procedural rhetoric, it's going to come in handy very, very soon. There are, as we can see from this scan, there's a lot. It's very interesting in issuing commands to Huey. So we see these are for Fiona, and this is for Huey. So, and if we look over here, you can see the entire list of things to remember. So you can tell Huey to go find items, you can call him to bring him back, you can praise him, you can scold him, and you can kick him. And then there's but to understand Huey, we should probably understand the dogs who came before Huey. So as Tanabe notes, dogs are believed to have come to Japan around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago with the Jomon settlers. These dogs would have been roughly the size of a Shiba Inu. They were buried after death. They seem to have been quite fondly understood. And these would have been the ancestors of what is typically recognized as the 6 Japanese breeds today. We did have a second wave of dogs that came with the Yayo people around 2300 before present. These may have been used as food. Tanabe believes that they would have been understood, these dogs would have been understood differently. So Japanese folklore. So the very, very, very early scholar of Japanese studies does note that there are not many stories about dogs that pose threats to human beings. Usually these are protectors. Although we do have, as Davison notes, a very, very rare example of a malevolent dog, the Inugami, which is a skimono, so in other words, possessing thing. These would have been dogs that were subjected to truly horrific bouts of animal cruelty and then were killed. They were believed to become vengeful spirits that could be harnessed against enemies and then passed down through family lines. As Davison notes, most dogs are fairly mundane, though. They're not supernatural. So dogs of the Nihon Shoki, sometimes called the Nihonchi if you look into it. This brings us our first named dog, actually, during the 1st century. So this is a Yuki who killed a badger And in the bowels of the badger is one of the sacred treasures of Japan. So these would have been curved beads. So if you've ever seen anime, maybe Inuyasha, yeah, those are the curved beads. We also have an unnamed white dog of the rebel, Yuruzo, and it when he dies, the dog bites off his head and then starves to death in a show of loyalty. The court was so moved by this, the Nihonji goes that they ordered a tomb to be built. The color white. So one of the things, so as Fundino notes, white is seen as particularly, quote, rare and sacred, end quote, and many of the dogs in Japanese mythology have white fur. As Fraser notes, Japanese texts from the 8th to 17th century portray white dogs with a, quote, virtuous and at times sacred quality. There's also, in terms of reincarnation, there's the idea that these dogs might might appear as humans in the next cycle of reincarnation or had previously existed as humans. Furthermore, if we look in Shinto mythology, the color white is linked with supernatural beings. So if you've ever wondered why the wolf dogs of Princess Mononoke are white, that's why. We also have more virtuous white dogs. We have the dog Shido of the story of the old man who made withers trees to flower. It's such a long name, my goodness. And this is a dog who grants his owner and the wife luck even after an untimely death at the hands of their neighbor, and he leads to the comeuppance of a wicked neighbor. We also have Shippitaro, which we don't have enough time for, but it's a really delightful story about the titular dog who disrupts the plans of wicked cats who like dance in a chapel and plot to eat a maiden as part of their annual tradition. It's fun. It's fun. We actually see Shippitaro over here as he goes to attack the lead cat, who's a mountain spirit, giant creature. So we'll have to go through this quite quickly, but this is we also have marriage to the animal other, as Fraser notes. So these are pretty unhappy. They have unhappy outcomes. The non-human wives will leave home once it's discovered, and the non-human husbands are often slain. Non-human husbands are less common. We have 3 variants as opposed to 8 variants for non-human wives, and dog spouse stories are relatively uncommon. So dog husband variants tend to take 2 forms, as Fraser notes. The most common is revenge. So the woman is promised to a dog and the dog is killed. The woman marries a hunter and then kills the hunter when she realizes that he is the murderer of her beloved dog spouse. The other one is a founding story, influenced by the Chinese counterpart, Panhu. It's kind of exactly what it says. More or less, it's exactly what it says. So German Shepherds in Japan. So unfortunately, any discussion of German Shepherds in Japanese media comes with a deeply unpleasant history. I'm afraid German Shepherds were used in Japanese colonization of Korea and China. And they did become quite heavily associated with the Japanese military as they helped to perpetuate atrocities. So unfortunately, we do have to talk about that. And that is part of the legacy Huey does inherit, even if the game itself is completely uninterested in exploring that in any dimension whatsoever. So that brings us to Huey. This is Huey over here, our beloved shepherd, our beloved white shepherd. So if Fran Bow is interested with the intersection of growing up in the child haunting ground wades into the very uncomfortable waters of human dominance over animals. Both of these are outsiders. Their survival is bound up with each other. Either both of them leave the castle or nobody leaves the castle at all. And the way the bond is approached within the text itself is that it's player mediated. So as you've suspected, if you're going to be issuing commands to Huey. Whether or not Huey listens to them is a different story. So, because Huey is marked by non-speech, it's a little difficult to talk about communicating with him. Um, because he is in part looking back with what John Berger would call the animal gaze, in which the human is not confirmed by the animal, and we have this very uncomfortable bridge that, well, Mr. Midnight bridges the divide with language. Huey is unfortunately does not speak back to us in human language. Um, so how do we think about this? We can start thinking about ways we can rely on Donna Haraway's idea of quote non-linguistic embodied communication. That is quote reliant on looking back. Sorry, that is reliant on quote looking back and greeting significant others again and again, and quote a complex intersection of quote co-constitutive natural cultural dancing, holding in esteem and regard open to those who look back reciprocally, end quote. So it's the idea of always reaching for each other, always moving the relationship. It's love that moves it, and it's love that gets ping ponged back and forth. um so I mean within the animal companion, maybe not. so um so we see this in the text itself. Huey will become more and more responsive to Fiona as the game goes on, provided you don't kick him. But instead, if you praise him for doing things well, if you're patient with him, he'll become patient in return, and he'll become more in tune with your needs as the player, um, acting through Fiona. So, and human speech, although is privileged, Huey does provide very, very valuable nonverbal communication that is incredibly important to assessing the environment. Okay, so this is our second clip and last clip. So I am telling you right now, I am giving you a content warning for dog attacks and threats of sexual violence. If you are like, don't feel it, I completely respect you. I will see you in 3 minutes. So the context for this is Fiona has just escaped the basement in which she has been held by her evil uncle in the water tower, and she is trying to get to a different area of the castle known as the House of Truth, where her uh, wicked grandfather resides. And So unfortunately, the family member that has been very much after her is trying to take her back to the basement because his plan for immortality is to rape her, so she will give birth to him again. Which, okay, so all right, we're gonna play the clip now.
Go! Go! Good boy.
Fiona! Why must you defy me? Why do you run? Let me into your womb!
There's nowhere to run.
Huey! Come on. Huey!
Nowhere to run.
Huey! Go! Huey! Go!
Fee. Oh. No.
Good boy.
Okay, so that was the end of Ricardo. So you can definitely see, once you see Hugh in action, I think a lot more of the becoming with starts to make sense. You are deeply reliant on Huey for getting out of the castle. So repeatedly being cruel to Huey will trigger the worst ending, which does align Fiona with her wicked family members. Um, and essentially, Huey is not there to rescue Fiona from the basement of the water tower, and Ricardo rapes her off screen. And she then goes mad from being forced to carry an incestuous pregnancy. So this is unfortunately an example of how sexual violence and reproductive control is used to punish women. So as much as it is a commentary on the morality of treating animals, it's also very much based on sexual violence, and we should definitely remember that. So the best ending is actually attained by treating non-humans relatively well. So if you show mercy to the non-human homunculus gardener, who is your first enemy of the level, that will, and you also treat Huey well as well. That will get you the best ending, in which we get a great sense of personal growth from Fiona, and she does look back at the, as you have no doubt guessed, and as Ewan Kirkland does write about quite a lot about the voyeuristic camera. So this cements Fiona as the true master of the castle, and Fiona will leave with Huey and Tail in a show of admiration and loyalty. This is Fiona looking back at the camera. So these are really interesting texts to think about. And they approach the subjectivity of animals from different points of origin and with different cultural resonances. But they also present the animal-human relationship as a site of resistance against really terrible societal forces. So whether that's medical exploitation or sexual violence, both of them follow a similar pattern. My God, they follow a similar pattern of rescuing animals and being rescued in kind. So one last thought I want to leave us all with is that they may or may not be related to the Saving the Animal stories from children's literature. So these are stories about a bond between an animal and a child, and the animal needs the child very, very much for help against the human world. The child gains mastery while protecting the animal, and the animal will come back in the child's hour of need to protect it. So while this is not a perfect map onto these stories, because animal rescue is not the driving narrative component, there are scenes of animal rescue that are, as we would say, high level. They are high level narrative. You cannot skip them. They are written into the story itself. And so we can, and while not all these stories are about while we see Fiona is definitely an adult, she's also like very much disempowered. So we have a few points of overlap. So we have relating to non-humans from positions of disempowerment and marginalization. We have rescuing animals and being rescued in kind, and we have internal growth through a powerful animal-human bond. Um, it's possible these kinds of stories about rescuing animals and having animals be next to you in like looted Gothic texts may be related to this. Um, it's just something to think about. Or as the meme goes, it's dangerous to go alone, so take a friend. All right, here's our bibliography. We have a lot of things. We have a lot of wonderful people. Um, there we go. All right.